thank you all for being here. We've got a great panel, and I know we're going to build on a lot of the strong conversation that you all started. So thank you guys for warming up the stage for us. By way of background, my first day leading media relations for the American Gaming Association was May 14th, 2018. Kind of a big day for the industry. As soon as the Supreme Court paved the way for states to legalize sports betting, they were off to the races. But iGaming is a completely different animal. So this panel is called, Is iGaming in the US Ever Going to Happen? As you guys stated, this is very blunt, so we're going to lean into that. All right, there are a lot of obstacles that iGaming faces that we didn't have with sports betting. We have major perception issues. We have a lack of industry alignment. So we're really going to lean into what are those obstacles? How do we get around them, and can we? To start, I'm going to go around with our panelists, and let's just start with a panel question. Is iGaming actually going to happen? Rhea, let's start with you.
Yes, it will happen. It's going to be a slow crawl, but it is coming.
All right. Rickard, do you agree?
I agree, but we are talking about probably 20 years. That's the kind of time frame we are. If we're looking like all states, if even that will ever happen. But 95 states probably.
So you're more in the meteor category, as Howard is calling it. What about you, Mike?
I think 100%. Like Howard said before, maybe not this year, but I think it's inevitable, I think, in the United States.
Yeah, I can't say anything different. It's chief pessimist now than optimist last year maybe, but it will happen, but it's now probably going to be a lot longer slog.
Okay, so let's see if we can try to figure out how we can speed that up in this. So on this panel, I'm going to try to juxtapose sports betting and iGaming a fair amount. Different animals, but we've got some learned lessons. So one thing that sports betting had going for it was it's obvious what it is. The name is pretty clear, sports betting. iGaming is completely different. So Mike, when you talk to legislators about legalizing sports betting, excuse me, we're past that. When you talk to legislators about legalizing iGaming, do you even call it iGaming? How do you talk about it?
Right, and that's something we've definitely run into across the country so far. If you go to Times Square right now, and after you fight an Elmo guy dressed up in an Elmo costume, and you ask someone, what do you think about iGaming? They're probably going to stare at you in the face and say, is that Call of Duty? Or is that that the game on the phone? I don't know how that works. And I think there's a perception issue as to exactly what iGaming is. Mm-hmm. I tell folks all the time, I'm relatively new to this. I joined FanDuel back in October, and if you asked me then, do you go gamble on your phone at all? When I would go to Jersey, I live in New York, I call it online casinos. And that's something we run into legislators as well. They have no idea what this is a lot of the time. And that's something I think we as an industry need to work on and educate folks on. I know this is the iGaming conference, but do we even call it iGaming anymore? Do we call it online casinos? Part of my job is to help convince legislators that this is something that their constituents want. And if their constituents don't even know what exactly they're asking for, it makes it that much more difficult. So, I think that's something we probably should have to work on.
I'm glad you mentioned the perception part of this because, if you've been in any of these panels, I'm sure you've heard the New York Times series. I know a lot of people have very strong opinions of it. Some people think it didn't have many merits and just the same old story you've heard before, just stronger. But it is resonating with some regulators and some legislators. And at a Seton Hall Law School event, the executive director of the New York State Gaming Commission said several commissioners were very responsive to the series. In fact, Vikström wrote a headline, I think this week, saying New York Times series haunts the industry in ongoing advertising debate. Rickard, how much of a role do you think the New York Times series played in slowing down iGaming, if at all?
I don't know. It's so hard to say, but yes, it is political, and it is that media influence into the industry and what's going on and what the perception, because it's all about perception. And that's why sports betting is so much easier to get through. But again, it's the perception. But like we're talking, like this panel before, in the end of the day, it's all about the money. These states need the money. Maybe not tomorrow, but if there is a recession coming, if there is markets like economy slowdown, give it 3 years, and we will have more and more states going into iGaming, like New York. Mm-hmm. I don't think we would have seen, without COVID, we wouldn't have seen sports betting in New York. That's my opinion on it.
That's probably correct. New York's. I used to work in the state senate. New York's always looking for more money. It's. I think as our chairman Adabo up in the racing committee said, it's not really if, it's when. And he's doing an excellent job up in Albany. And I'm sad to see he's not here today, but I'm happy he's up there fighting for this cause.
So that is one narrative we know that is resonating, the money aspect. Justin, what other messages do you think are hitting the right tone with legislators?
Well, it was covered in the previous panel. I think some of the getting the black market out, having a good, well-regulated industry helps from a know your customer, AML perspective. So it's not just the tax revenue. There is a positive story there, and that's really probably the narrative that does need to be pushed from a perception perspective. We kind of. I don't know why we called ourselves iGaming. To the point that you said is that it's a kind of catch-all for everything. I think the industry does it to sometimes maybe play down that perception of online casino and being kind of all about gambling. But I think leaning into having well-regulated providers rather than a black market is definitely the other way to push that perception piece.
So tease that out for me. Calling yourselves iGaming isn't necessarily the most effective thing. How would you message that?
I don't know. I've lost my microphone. My ears are too big. I think I don't know is the answer. I don't know the best way to call us. I know there's a couple of industry kind of players that call us, try to capture everything as real money gaming. That means you can then have sportsbook and, thank you very much. You can include the sportsbook side of things and so on. So it's probably iGaming will do for now, but I think what Mike said earlier is that calling it online casino is a better catch-all for sure.
I want to go back to the comment of the perception of the industry and touch on, the importance of responsible gambling. And, we're in Problem Gambling Awareness Month, but, this really isn't a March issue, and I think all operators know that. Everyone in this room knows that. The industry knows that Bill hit on it. What is our narrative? What are we coming together talking about? Martin talked about the 12 principles that FanDuel, BetMGM, others came together to discuss the 12 principles of responsible gaming. Also, individually as operators, all of us have our own responsible gaming programs, but how are we messaging that? There's a panel later on the player protections that operators and regulators are talking about, and also recently BetMGM launched a campaign on responsible gambling, and we have a partnership with GameSense, and we're making it more prominent in all of our advertising. We're making the messaging not just the RG hotline, but we're expanding it, and you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more of that narrative and the importance of that to this industry, because that's going to be an important part of changing the perception.
I love what you said about this not being just Problem Gambling Awareness Month. This needs to be Problem Gambling all throughout the month. So, Mike, you were nodding. What would you like?
I just wanted to kind of add to that. I think it's also a cultural question as well. The United States is, I think, compared to the rest of the world, a little more conservative with a lot of aspects, especially with gaming. Casinos are, I think there's a stigma attached to them for a lot of folks, unfortunately. But sports betting, I think, was the easier sell. America has a very deep love of sports. We have sports for everything, and we love our teams. I am a Jets fan. It sucks. But sports betting makes it more fun. It makes it an event. It's a really great time having your friends over. You have a few drinks. The Jets are going to lose today, but hey, I placed $50 on them today. Hopefully, I get a little bit of money back. It's an event. With online gambling and all that, it's not as much, I've found. It's harder to do. No one's going to sit around on their couch with their buddies and play blackjack all day long. So I think we need to pump up the social aspect of it. People like to tell a story. Everyone has a sports betting story where they play some ridiculous parlay and they won money on it. And it's, I found with online gaming or online casinos, I should say, there you go. You don't have that as much. Yeah, you hit the money in once in a while, but I think there's sometimes a missing social aspect to it.
No, but I just want to add to what Rhea was saying regarding the social aspect and helping the players that had the problematic players, and that the industry comes together. But because looking at the European market, like now the regulators are going against because the market have been too aggressive, and that's something the market should learn from. Don't be too aggressive on online casino, because it will hit you back. Maybe not tomorrow, in 5 years. In UK, it's not even profitable to do like anything related to casino in the UK at the moment because of that.
I think it's definitely been faster. I think the perception I have is that that kind of negative perception, growth and worry about the responsible gambling, it seems to have kind of been a bit of a slower burn throughout Europe, and whereas the US seems to have done it faster, right? It seems to be kind of charging towards that, the regulators having that more of a concern about those things when you've not actually kind of got the whole market yet. So you're already having those kind of doubts, those concerns, those kind of conversations that I think in the UK and European markets kind of took a little bit longer to have, certainly perhaps from a different kind of cultural aspect to it.
I know we've been pointing to the UK as the example of what we don't want to be for a while. It's the bad regulatory example. And do you all feel in the past few months we've started to see some pushback in Ohio, Massachusetts, that regulators are getting more vocal about things like advertising? Are we inching toward the UK regulatory backlash, or is there still time to change the tune?
Who wants to answer that?
Mike, thank you for volunteering.
Yeah, thanks. It's hard to say. I think potentially we could be getting there. At the same time, the U.S. is also, I found, a little more business friendly than I think Europe is. There may come a hard point, eventually where they just stop. It also, it depends on the state. The United States is a very fascinating place. It's one country, but really it's 50 countries under one under one banner. So it really isn't a state-by-state basis. Like you brought up the New York Times before, that article. If you go to the blue state legislatures, it was like the ceiling was falling through. But out in the red states, I think they banned the New York Times in a lot of those states. It kind of all depends. And I could see it getting there in some states. Some regulators are harder than others. But we'll have to see. We are getting there quick, but it's going to take a few years before we really kind of get there.
And I think that the we'll see, the in between the what happens now and the we'll see is very much on how the industry comes together and how we align on what our responsible gaming principles are. And so a lot of that depends on us, how we want to drive this industry forward and what we care about and how we're going to operate, how responsibly we'll be. So I think that it depends on us.
I teased this earlier on, but one of the things that sports betting had going for it was that there was a very united front from the industry and a consistent messaging campaign. That's one of the things we do in my current role building public affairs campaigns. We're trying to figure out the arguments that are resonating best with our target audiences. Obviously, our target audience here, largely legislators, regulators, et cetera. So I'll put it back on you, Rhea. If we had the industry aligned behind iGaming and we could do an aggressive messaging campaign around responsible gambling, what is the main message you want to put out there?
Well, I think the first thing, and it was talked about in the earlier panel, and we hit on it as well, is the illegal market is out there, and it's out there, and it's happening. So, one thing that the industry has to educate on is there's no player protections in the illegal market. It's not regulated. What happens when you don't go ahead and pay for those bills? So that's the first thing, is what are we doing about the illegal market? And you're not getting any tax funds from that market as well. So it's that one, and then it's also, I think it's aligning on, it's areas like the 12 principles where all the operators are coming together and saying, hey, this is what our standards are, and this is what we're holding ourselves to, outside of just the regulatory requirements. It's the AGA, it's a similar code like we have with the AGA Sports Wagering Marketing Code. It's some alignment in areas, and that helps the messaging and that helps the narrative. It's also education. It's educating around what is KYC. What steps do players have to go through before they're on our online platforms? I'm not sure that the general public or every legislator out there knows that you actually have to provide us a lot of information. We have to verify your age. We have to verify that you're not on a self-exclusion list. It is so common in our everyday vernacular that we talk about these things, but we need to do a better job educating those that aren't immediately in our industry about what it means when we say KYC.
This is something I love to talk about. If you're following me on Twitter, you say I'm ranting very often about acronyms and saying things like RG, because as you said, oftentimes we're talking to ourselves. You know, it's nice that we're in New York City right now because this isn't just a gambling conference. We do have people coming in from different sectors. So we're trying to use language that isn't just the same old jargon over and over again. Do you think that iGaming, I'm not going to put this back on you, I'll transition, but is iGaming itself a jargon-heavy term? Is this something we came up with to try to make it seem like it's not gambling? Because we're still kind of running from the word gambling to begin with. We call ourselves the gaming industry. How much of that is intentional?
Yeah, there is a fair amount of terminology that we kind of throw around, like RG, and you know, I have to every now and again look up VLTs and VGTs. There's a you know, it's almost, well, like, you know, myself and Rickard, from the technical side of things, we love an acronym. Everything's 3 letters, and you know, we get confused among the others. I think that there can definitely be much better messaging, much better thinking about who you're messaging towards. You know, you're right. We don't want to talk amongst ourselves effectively. It's a way of shutting out everyone else from some of the positives that you want to push. You know, as the black market kind of side of things is definitely. The fear message can work from a perception perspective, that you want us being the best guys rather than the bad guys. That's you know, but more simplistic and less kind of, you know, hiding behind what that terminology is, for sure.
I 100% agree with what he just said. You know, our challengers is the black market, it's the illegal market. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're sitting behind in a boardroom discussing, okay, what do we call this? I don't know. They don't care. They're just trying to just get a product out there with no protections, like you said, and it's dangerous for the customer. And it's people don't like to be BS'd. I think they want to know, what are you selling them, and mm-hmm. It makes our jobs easier to make this stuff legal in the respective states.
Yeah, no, but just adding to like acronym, what's going on, like now when you see a lot of companies going into Michigan, going into Pennsylvania to build up the funds, that build up that market. There wasn't like 3-4 years, like pre-COVID. There is a market, there is a growing market that's doing very well, and that enables these kind of conferences, because this makes us come together, we talk together, and discuss this kind of thing. What do we even call ourselves? Mm-hmm. We didn't have that discussion 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. Not even think, it was a lottery back then. And that, it won't be, again, happening tomorrow, but these things coming together will drive the industry forward. We'll set Michigan, Pennsylvania, 2 great examples, where there's a lot of content providers, there's a lot of operators, there's a lot of suppliers around the industry that are doing very well. And that can be replicated into new states to show that blueprint to new states. But still, it takes time. Mm-hmm. But now we have something to show. There is something for us to get together around.
I want to build on that a bit. So I like what you said about us coming together on this. If we're going to advance iGaming legalization, make this actually happen, it can't just be the industry. We've got to look out to other allies. You know, we looked to sports betting. We had great allies when it came to attorneys general, law enforcement, et cetera. Rickard, let's look outside the industry. What allies are there for iGaming? For iGaming legalization, I'll clarify.
Everyone that needs tax money? Can I just do that?
Rhea, anything to add?
Truly, the recipients of the tax funds in the states, the programs that it funds, the education programs, policy programs, you know, the general state funds, those are the true beneficiaries of iGaming.
Do you think that that's an argument that is resonating or would resonate with lawmakers?
In some states. It should resonate.
I think cash poor states definitely. Like I said before, New York's always looking for money. Illinois is another blue state that they're always finding ways to tax people more. It might be harder to sell in a place like Ohio, which they're doing well financially over there. So it all depends. If there's a recession this year, next year, who knows? Economists seem to be kind of getting it wrong more and more. But eventually there's going to come a point where states do need cash, and they're going to need a way to fill it in. And as Howard said, we're asking, hey, tax us, please. This is a product that we want to introduce to the state. It's effectively, it's great money, and let's legalize it.
Are there any other states in particular you can point to that, if the economy does change and you think that they're in greater need of funding, you think that those are good targets to head back to?
New York. It's New York and Illinois. Those are the two that kind of popped in mind that we'll always look for a quick fix for cash.
I think Colorado's in that bucket as well. I think that there's a few states that are still out there, that there's conversations that can continue to happen, but a lot's going to depend on the economy.
So we went to breakfast this morning, which is fun, good warm-up session for the panel, and there was an interesting part of our conversation where I just asked, I had a funny conversation yesterday with someone about how many states have legalized iGaming, and he was like, what do you mean? That's not really that's a definitive thing. And as you guys were talking about on the panel before us, some people say one number, some say another, if you include Nevada. But at our breakfast this morning, we learned that there's a little more disagreement around how many states have legalized iGaming. So, gentlemen, give us your answers.
Do you want to go first?
I don't like being in the middle. I don't like being right here.
Now it gets contentious, or it gets spicy, as you guys have been saying.
No, I answered 4 and then I changed to 5 because I didn't count Delaware. I forgot that one.
I counted 6.
But walk us through why it was a different number to begin with.
No, I would say focus, like the industry focus. The industry focus is New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, and now Connecticut, of course, and that's the focus. Delaware, sorry, it's not so much focus. Even that Biden is coming from there, it's not a big focus. Sorry.
I mean, don't give out hope on Delaware. They, they just put out an RFP recently, and none of the major operators applied to it, which I think sends a message to the state that their model does not work well. So it's a very confusing one, and we can go, I think, a whole panel on state models and what's more effective or less effective. So there was just an interesting conversation we had there. I was ribbing him a little bit because he didn't mention Connecticut, and my company is, we are in Connecticut, and I said you can't forget them. They're the great state of Connecticut. So.
Good company pride.
Yeah.
Justin, did you have something to add there?
No, I was very similar. I was kind of glad these two argued because I was going to say 6 and a bit with a bit of Nevada in there.
Yes.
In some way. So I was glad they kind of pointed themselves out as a slight disagreement. I think Rickard and ourselves kind of look at what's the potential from a supplier to perspective, and obviously if a market's a single kind of operator, then there's less for Rickard and I to kind of see. Anyone that kind of goes with a monopolistic kind of entry, then that was why I would have gone 5 and a bit or 6 and a bit. But yeah, it was. I was glad you guys argued it first. I felt I didn't need to join in.
Making it sound like we fought it out in the middle of the restaurant. Like,
it was exactly like that.
Throwing eggs and everything.
Yeah, it was it.
Okay, so we have 6, we have maybe 7, we have maybe 5. Hopefully we'll get that number much bigger. But if that's not happening, Rhea, what are the state legislators going to do the rest of the year? We talked about this preparing for this panel. Will there be a lull?
I think there's never a lull in our industry. I've said for about 4 years, when things slow down, we will focus on X, Y, and Z. But things have never slowed down. So, I think that what it creates is opportunities for operators to work on their product, work on their efficiencies of their operations, take some time to focus on other areas. We want it to grow, we want it to go fast, but there's going to be other opportunities, there's going to be product enhancements, there's going to be other things that will be going on in that lull. So, my world's never slow. So, while it might be a little bit slow in the expansion front, in the general compliance front, it is always busy.
I think yes, it's going to be a definite slowdown. We started saying that as to how we thought things were going to progress. The pace we were running at previously was really hard to sustain. Like certainly from Rickard's perspective, trying to supplier. I think our planning teams, if you call them that, are going to have a bit of an easier time, hopefully, without everything changing every month. But I'll say that, and famously it'll go wrong next month, and there you go. But I think we're probably looking at a little bit less of a kind of mad rush into each state and having to kind of achieve live status prior to the next big game, for example. In iGaming, there's not necessarily that kind of thing, although you do want to be live in time for March Madness or for Super Bowl or so on. But yeah, I think a lull in opening, but not a lull in activity. And I think some of the regulators are looking at other areas of, so the business you already have, the regulators aren't just stopping. They're not just saying that's it. Some are looking at security concerns. Some are looking at stronger kind of responsible gaming concerns. So I think there'll still be a huge amount of maintained activity, but I think, from a iGaming perspective, we were going to try and name the next 3, and we were kind of struggling beyond 1 or 2. And,
we're still doing it.
Yeah, there may or may not be a lull. Who knows? It's in my experience so far, this stuff changes on a dime. I think if you asked me back in January, what'll be the next iGaming state, I would have told you with almost certainty Indiana.
Yep.
And that changed literally within a week. And New York wasn't even on the radar at all, and now we're talking about it. If it's legalized this year is a separate question. It may be a year or so, but the fact that the ball is rolling there is interesting. State legislatures are fickle, and they sometimes stuff changes quickly. So I'm ever the optimist, but we'll see what happens.
All right, so I'll ask you guys this again in a month, so give you a little more wiggle room in case things really change. But let's close out our session. Quick little round robin. Each person give me your 3 states you think are going to legalize iGaming next. And it doesn't necessarily mean, this session. Meteor's coming, of course. But just looking ahead, which 3 are next? Let's start with you, Justin.
Oh, man, I was the worst one to start with. I couldn't think beyond 2. So I suppose the good thing is that everyone can correct me, but New York, Illinois, and Indiana maybe, but everyone says that every year, so I don't know. Go on.
It actually was the same answer for me. I was in Indiana kind of when things were starting to fall apart, and they're not against iGaming itself, which is good. Mm-hmm. It's ancillary matters that we I think have to address. So my number 1, I think it will be Indiana. Illinois, I think, is taking a serious look at it. And I am ever the New Yorker, and I always will have pride in my Empire State. I think we will have it soon.
Well, look, I don't like to order the same meal as anyone else at the table at a restaurant, so I'll have the same appetizers, and I'll stick with Illinois and Indiana. But look, I mentioned Colorado earlier. It's been a very friendly state for operators. I think it should be on the list, so I'm going to put it as my 3rd since you're covering New York.
And I like Illinois, New York, and add New Hampshire into it. Let's see. We have 1 new state into the list.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Well, great discussion. I think there are a lot of good takeaways here, but certainly let's figure out which arguments are resonating. Let's get a consistent drumbeat out there so the right people are hearing those, and maybe we'll see some more progress. Thank you.
Thank you.